Chapter 3 of Fire in the Minds of Men. Chapter 3: The Objects of Belief. While seeking to legitimize their revolution by sanctifying a place, a process, or even a picture, Frenchmen still sought to define their beliefs in words. There was a trend towards radical simplification, however, as they increasingly tended to substitute labels for arguments, in attempting to state simply the purpose of secular society under popular sovereignty. They found three basic answers. Each was expressed by one of the words of the most important slogan of the era: liberty, fraternity, and equality. Each of these three ideals had ancient origins, but each acquired a new mystical aura during this period. At the beginning of the revolution, they had blended into a Trinitarian unity, but there were deep, inherent differences between the three concepts, and much of the subsequent history of the revolutionary tradition involved recurring and widening conflict between these rival ideals. First came the political ideal of rescuing freedom through a constitutional republic. This was the original revolutionary cause of liberty, defined in terms of constitutional rights and popular legislatures. Property, no less than people, was to be freed from traditional bondage to non-productive authority, an idea that made the Republican ideal attractive to entrepreneurs of all sorts. Second came the emotional ideal of experiencing brotherhood in a new kind of nation. This was the romantic vision of fraternity, the discovery amidst a struggle against others that one's immediate neighbors are one's brothers, linguistically, culturally, geographically, fellow sons of a common fatherland. Finally came the intellectual idea of creating a non-hierarchical social economic community. This was the rationalistic concept of equality, the collective sharing of goods within a community free of all social and economic distinctions. In general terms, the first ideal may be identified with the Enlightenment reformism of the 18th century, the second with the romantic nationalism of the 19th, the third with the authoritarian communism of the 20th. The post-1789 history of the revolutionary tradition was to show the gradual, near-universal spread of the first ideal, followed by growing conflict between the other two, though political liberation spread from France in the 18th century through Europe in the 19th to the wide world in the 20th. The split between the rival ideas of national and social revolution grew and deepened. In considering these ideals, then, we shall concentrate attention not so much on the first ideal, which arose in the relatively familiar debates culminating in the creation of the First French Republic in 1792. We shall focus more on the less understood rival ideas of national and social revolution, which arose to serve the more elusive goals of brotherhood and equality. Fraternal nationalism dominated the period of war and terror from 1792 through 1794. Egalitarian communism appeared during the subsequent period of seeming stagnation under the Directory. Liberty, the Republican ideal. The replacement of a monarchy by a republic was the major accomplishment of the initial period of the Revolution. In the course of 1793, the Republican ideal was sealed in blood by the execution of the king, in ink by the drafting of a radical constitution, and in time by the adoption of a revolutionary calendar. La République represented the Enlightenment ideal of a rational political order. It replaced old privileged distinctions with the single category of citizen, the rule of kings with the rule of law, royaume by loyaume. Humanity was thereby freed from the arbitrary authority of the past in favor of rational perfectibility in the future, through laws established by popular assemblies and through virtue inculcated in secular schools. Republican and republicanism had been transformed from terms of opprobrium to labels of pride by the American Revolution, particularly during the 6 months of intense debates prior to the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January 1776, played a decisive role through its secular millenarian insistence that we have it in our strength to begin the world over again by establishing a new constitutional union. Yet Republican was not a major rallying cry in America during the debates leading up to the Constitution of 1787, and the American experience with Republican rule did not prove very appealing to Europeans in the 1780s. In the debates over the first revolutionary constitution for France during the summer of 1789, the ablaze called for direct popular rule by a single legislative chamber prevailed over the rival idea of an American-style balanced government with a bicameral legislature and executive, that is, a royal veto. The movement toward a republican government in France and the discussion of its proper constitution did, however, generate genuine excitement, not least in Paine's own defense of the French Revolution against Burke in 1791. What were formerly called revolutions were little more than a change of person or an alteration of local circumstances. What we now see in the world is a renovation of the natural order of things, a system of principles as universal as truth. When the First Republic was formally established, Paine moved to Paris, accepted French citizenship, found the first Republican Society in Paris, edited a short-lived journal, The Republican, and attracted an ire even of Jacobins by his quasi-devotional use of the word Republican. Paine was only one of many foreigners to find a new identity as citizen of the Revolutionary Republic, Babeuf only one of many Frenchmen to refer to Republican as the sublime word. The continuing debate about a constitution, even after the adoption of one in 1791, lent an added aura to the word as well. In the first issue of a new revolutionary journal in 1792, Bonneville insisted that this health-giving word, the sacred word constitution, must exercise a prodigious influence on the destinies of the human race. Fascination grew in late 1792 and early 1793 as the convention prepared the more radical Republican Constitution of 1793. Though never put into effect, its text was carried like a holy object from the Bastille to the Champ de Mars in the great feast of August 10th, 1793. It remained a venerated model for many political revolutionaries well into the 19th century. One of the few demonstrable demonstrable results of the two greatest upheavals within France in that century, the Revolution of 1848 and the Paris Commune of 1871, was the re-establishment of constitutional republican governments, the Second and Third Republics successively. The major, though short-lived, expression abroad of the revolutionary French ideal was the founding of satellite republics, Batavian, Cisalpine, Helvetian, and so forth. As we shall see, the European-wide revolutionary tradition began as a series of republican constitutional conspiracies against an imperial Napoleon and the monarchical restoration that followed him. But in 1793, revolutionary France was ready to reject many Republicans, including Paine and other foreigners gathered in Paris around journals like Le Cosmopolite, and talking economically about the great human republic. By then, Frenchmen were inventing modern nationalism and the worship of its exclusive and elusive ideal, la grande nation. Fraternity, the rise of nationalism. The second new ideal to emerge in the French Revolution was that of la nation, a new fraternity in which lesser loyalties as well as petty enmities were swept aside by the exaltation of being born again as enfants de la patrie, children of a common fatherland. The nation was a militant ideal that was largely discovered on the jour de gloire of battle and best expressed in the Levée en Masse of 1793, the prototype of modern mass conscription on a national scale. The American Revolution had originated the concept of independence as a political rather than philosophical ideal, creating in effect a new nation through a revolution. But the United States did not call itself a nation in the Declaration of Independence or constitute itself as a nation in the modern sense. There was no new language to be asserted, no mythologized antiquity to be created, no continuing foreign threats bordering on the new territorial unity, an entity. The official designation United States was the only formal name of a major country prior to the creation of the Soviet Union that contained no ethnic or national designation. In America, a sense of nationhood was the child, not the parents of the revolution. In the French Revolution, on the contrary, the concept of a nation was central even though no new country was created. The word nation soon predominated over the older and more paternalistic term patrie. Flag, feasts, and songs were all said to be national, and Bonneville, while organizing the Paris militia in the summer of 1789, warned against enemies de la nation. Citizens of the old regime were forced to communicate in the French language, which until then had not been the basic tongue of many living under the French crowns. The word nation had been used in Roman times to describe a native community smaller than a people but larger than a family, and in the late Middle Ages to describe regional student groups within university and differing groups within church councils. Pre-revolutionary France used the term for a representative group of aristocrats in choosing the name Assemblée Nationale instead of représentants du peuple français. The revolutionary Third Estate sought to give itself, in effect, aristocratic status. The term nation was not widely understood at first. Peasants forced a well-dressed man to cry "Vive la nation" early in the revolution, then begged him, "Explain to us just what is the nation?" But the label was soon understood to define a new type of popular sovereignty that was territorially and linguistically unified and often more absolute than monarchical authority. God himself was reborn in early revolutionary tracts as the savior of nations, the august and sublime national Aerobagus, and prayers were addressed to the body of the nation. The concept of la nation gave tangible definition as well as higher legitimacy to the revolution. The revolution acquired spatial dimensions and was henceforth embodied not in complex republican institutions, but in simple concentric circles. The borders of France were an outer ideological moat, Paris the inner citadel, the National Assembly the perfect points of authority within Paris itself. The revolutionary nation was proclaimed indivisible, and its borders expandable. The archenemy of the French Revolution, the Abbé Barruel, introduced the term nationalism to denigrate the new form of parochial secular selfishness that he felt was replacing universal Christian love as the human ideal. Militant nationalism reached the European masses largely through Napoleon, the first ruler to base a political regime exclusively upon the nation, the most powerful, purely national symbol that any nation has had, some more positively inspired by his example of nationalism, the Poles and Italians. Others were negatively stimulated to form national movements against him, the Spaniards and Prussians. By the end of his career, Napoleon's Grande Armée had in effect supplanted the revolutionary Grande Nation. That army was two-thirds foreign by the time of its decisive defeat in the Battle of the Nations in 1813 by a coalition of the nationalism he had awakened throughout Europe. Nationalism remained the major revolutionary ideal until the final quarter of the 19th century. Its mysterious power and continuing mutations make essential a closer look at its origins. The birth of this new ideal was both sublime and bloody, involving the heights of music and the depths of terror. The birth of a nation takes us beyond the Paris of Robespierre to the Strasbourg of Saint Just. The Song from Strasbourg. Strasbourg, the largest city of the Lower Rhine, was France's major link with Europe, with a Catholicism that was more than Gallican. The bishop retained political allegiance to the Holy Roman Emperor, with a religion that was more than Catholic. A third of Strasbourg was Protestant, and with a culture that was more than French. Most of the city spoke German. Strasbourg had been France's most important continental conquest during the century and a half prior to the Revolution. When the upheaval came, this exploded outpost felt particularly vulnerable. The bishop's patrimony was confiscated, the German-speaking university was shut, and the great pentagonal fortress built by Vauban was reinforced by an elite army of the Rhine. Strasbourg did not just accept, but amplified and transformed the rising new French nationalism. internalizing German ideas even as it combated the external threats of German arms. Unlike Paris, Strasbourg was not distracted by competing factions and multiple political institutions. Its quasi-medieval municipal structure gave Strasbourg relative unity within itself and solidarity with the surrounding Alsatian countryside. Even its café culture was an establishment activity devoid of Parisian license and radiating gemuntiliclet. The twice-elected Protestant mayor of revolutionary Strasbourg, Frederick Dietrich, unified the city with a family having both French and German branches, Didier and Dietrich. A multilingual Swiss wife and a bilingual saloon where old antagonisms tended to melt away. In the early beleaguered months of 1792, a national consciousness was intensified by the growing sense that an enemy was near and war was likely. The normal population of 50,000 had been swollen by friends of the revolution fleeing from Austria and Prussia, and by volunteers from all over France coming to reinforce the garrison city on the Rhine. The news that both Germanic monarchs had declared war on revolutionary France reached Strasbourg before Paris, and on the night of April 24, 1792, Dietrich commissioned a young engineer captain from his saloon, Claude-Joseph Rouget de Lilsle, to write a song that would arouse the polyglot army to resist the anticipated Habsburg attack. In the feverish inspiration of one night, he wrote a song that rallied a people as had no other song since Luther's In Fils de Bourg. Originally called Chant de guerre de l'armée du Rhin, its surprisingly bloodthirsty lines were sung with special zest by newly arrived volunteers from afar. The contingent from Marseille gave the song from Strasbourg its permanent name, La Marseillaise. The origin of La Marseillaise in Strasbourg was not accidental, for this was the city in which the rich musical culture of Germany flowed into France. It had both French and German cathedral choirs. It had both French and German cathedral choirs, French and German opera houses, and the finest orchestras in pre-revolutionary France, outside of Paris and Versailles. Strasbourg manufactured instruments as well as melodies. The great piano manufacturer Ignace Pleyel became Kapellmeister in the Strasbourg Cathedral in 1789, drawing on both Catholic pageantry and Protestant hymnography. Strasbourg produced an original revolutionary repertoire, introducing elaborate musical compositions into open-air revolutionary festivals via the Pleyel Rouget de Lil's Limb of Liberty. First performed on September 25, 1791, it used the entire audience as a chorus for the first time, a technique that would only later transported to Paris. The austere words of Rouget, renouncing the vain delirium of profane gaiety and soft voluptuousness, suggested the revolutionary puritanism that lay ahead. La Marseillaise was from the beginning a kind of corporate production. When Rouget first presented the rough melody to the mayor in his saloon, Dietrich who was a tenor, became the first to sing it, and his violinist wife the first to orchestrate it. La Marseillaise electrified the nation going to war. The two leading composers of the opera comique, Dalariac and Gossec, composed offering to liberty religious scene on the Marseillaise. This religious scene was taken out of the theaters into army camps. Choruses of women knelt before statues of liberty singing the verse Amour sacre de la patrie, as a hushed prayer, then rising to sing the final verse with a percussion accompanied that would make the pavement leave the streets for the frontier. The leading composer of the era, André Ch3, congratulated Rouget for creating musique à coups de canon, and in his Guillaume Tell, perhaps the most popular new opera of the Revolutionary era, began the popular practice of inserting the anthem directly into operatic scores. The tide of passion aroused by music soon engulfed its early patrons. In 1792, Dietrich was swept out of office as a moderate accused of affinities with Lafayette. Musical militance intensified at the Strasbourg celebration of the first anniversary of the founding of the Republic on August 10, 1793, when Pleyel and Roger de Lille staged their remarkable The Allegorical Alarm Bell. Described as a battle in music, the pageant took place in the newly transformed cathedral underneath 7 bells suspended from the cupola. The bells, like the enormous chorus and cast, had been gathered in from all over Alsace. They were to be melted down from cannon immediately after the production. The first part was purely orchestral, the arousal of the people. When alarm bells rang, the second movement, the battle, began. Only when all combat was finished did human voices burst forth from the first time in a triumphant chorus, ending with La victoire est à nous. So great was the Strasbourgeois belief in the unifying power of music that its craftsmen invented a new system for printing the notes on the of the new national music. So great was the fear of evocative melody that the priest, who later restored Catholic authority to the cathedral, decreed that only bleaking plain song and organ drone would henceforth be permitted in ordinary worship. Music reached a special crescendo in Strasbourg precisely during the Terror. It seems appropriate that the first guillotine was made by a piano maker in Strasbourg named Schmidt, and was first brought to Paris to be used on a living person on April 25, 1792, at almost exactly the moment that Roger de Lille was finishing La Marseillaise. Strasbourg brought France the excitement not just of the German musical tradition, but also of the German theater. The anti-traditional, anti-Habsburg dramas of Friedrich Schiller were usually introduced into France by performances in Strasbourg, and the principal translations of Schiller into French were made by Nicolas Bonneville when he was studying in Strasbourg during the 1780s. The early German Romantics inspired the altogether new type of play that Bonneville wrote in 1789 to commemorate the fall of the Bastille. It was a tragédie nationale designed for the peuple germain, peuple frère, worthy of entering a new société fraternelle. Bonneville appealed to Camille Desmoulins to institutionalize this national genre as a kind of rebuke to the lackeys of the court, who favored light entertainment devoid of moral purpose. Strasbourg became the major continental correspondence center for Bonneville's social circle, and the place for translating and publishing its works for distribution in the German world. Charles Nodier, a late pioneer in secret revolutionary organization and the inventor of the anti-traditional partly musical genre of melodrama, discovered German literature through Bonneville's translations and dedicated his Essay of a Young Bard to Bonneville. Inspired by Schiller-Bonneville and by Romanticism, a word first used in Bonneville's circle, Nodier passed on his implausible plots and iconoclastic heroes and to his famous literary protege Victor Hugo. The principal teacher of Nodier in Strasbourg was Elogius Schneider, the most original, imaginative, and violent of the many Germans who immigrated to revolutionary Strasbourg. Schneider, a former Capuchin monk, became an illuminist in Neuwied and a popular professor at Bonn until he was dismissed for heresy in June 1791. He led the radical Republican overflow of Mayor Dietrich, composed the first German translation of La Marseillaise, edited two extremist journals, founded a special unit for popular revolutionary indoctrination throughout Alsace called La Propagande, and served as chief prosecutor of the Revolutionary Tribunal in Strasbourg. Nodier later recalled that with aesthetic fascination and execution where Schneider's propagandists, wearing red hats and tricolor sashes, and with large hunting knives, lectured the spectators. After genuflecting before the scaffold, the principal orator delivered a panegyric to the guillotine in the name of liberty. I felt a cold sweat appear on my forehead and wash down over my eyelids. The Reign of Terror came early to Strasbourg. During the long siege that begun in August 1793, Schneider took over the German theater in Strasbourg as his headquarters and popularized the word denunciation in the revolutionary vocabulary. The mayor of Strasbourg insisted that the word inn be substituted for the feudal term hotel throughout the city, and the Germans writing in Schneider's journal brought a new flood of rustic metaphors into French revolutionary nationalism. The Prussian anarchists, Cloutz, in his Patriotic Crusade, spoke of the French nation's historic right to control the Rhine. The mouths of the Rhine, the ancient frontier of Gaul, will sing the hymn of liberty in the shadow of our victorious banner. Let us rush en masse to the banks of the great river, and never again will a German crowd in on the soil of the new-born France. Cloutz had been the first festival on the Champ de Mars as a return. Cloutz had seen the first festival on the Champ de Mars as a return of the French people to being all German and all brothers. Another German witness compared it to the ancient barbarian ritual in which the Franc, a free union of Germans, gathered yearly in order to declare to the king the sovereign will of the people. The ancient German tribes became a mythic prototype for the sovereign people within a revolutionary nation. Bonneville's alternative to the indulgence and selfishness of modern civilization was a viral pre-Christian communalism of the free man, franc, such as Tacitus had described among the early Germans. Bonneville praised Frankish tribalism in his Manifesto of the Friends of Truth in 1789. Later, he praised the barbarisms over their civilized oppressors in his prophecy of an old Druid against the Romans. Bonneville saw the nation learning from the University of Nature, with a modern Druid like himself helping it rediscover the lost language of truth. La nature est un livre immense à dévorer. La langue en est perdue, il faut la retrouver. Nature is an immense book to be devoured. Its language is lost and must be recovered. The language was largely German, not just the sighs and tears of the early Romantics so well known to Bonneville, but also the compound words with abstract appositions like peuple Dieu, which he imported wholesale into the French language. There were many other contributors to this process in addition to Bonneville, Cloutz, and their friends J.G. Seifert, the doctor of Philippe of Orléans, who led the short-lived German Legion in Paris and was called the Vandal, A.G.F. Rebmann, the leading publisher of German journals in Paris, and the Frey brothers, German-speaking Jews from Strasbourg, one of whom wrote a defense of terror by a minority, Philosophies sociales. In trying to weed out the verbiage of the defunct French Academy and create a language, make a religion for la nation, Bonneville drew heavily on Germanisms and followed the Strasbourg custom of publishing tracts bilingually. People, like nation and other symbolic substantives, acquired a capital letter in the Germanic fashion in the new French phrases like peuple roi, peuple Dieu, and peuple sauveur. Cloutz's pledge of allegiance to La Nation required capital letters throughout. My profession of faith is a reassuring for the patriot as it is terrible for the tremendous. I believe in the infallibility of the people. Partly created by German influences in France, nationalism was first so named by a French exile in Germany, the Abbé Borel. Herder, the original romantic lover of Germanic variety, had in fact previously used the words nationalismus and nationalism in a cultural sense as early as 1774. Herder's image of a rustic and virtuous and musical German nationality was admired by radical French thinkers as they sought to define their own national identity. Long before Madame de Staël's Germany in 1810, Schneider's pupil, Charles Nodier, spoke rapturously of that marvelous Germany, the last country of poesy and belief in the West, the future cradle of a strong society to come, if there is any society left to be created in Europe. For the romantic political imagination, the locus of legitimacy no longer lay in a city, but in a nation. That nation sometimes seemed to speak with a rustic German accent. The Saints from Picardy. By the early fall of 1793, Strasbourg was dispirited by terror from within and the threats of German occupation from without. The Alsatian city was the exposed outpost of the revolutionary nation, the point towards which advancing Prussian and Austrian troops appeared to be converging, at a time when Lyon, the second city of France, had already fallen to counter-revolutionaries, and a peasant revolt raged in the Vendée. On October 17th, Paris sent a special proconsul of La Nation to rally people and collect provisions for the army of the Rhine. In a little over 2 months in Strasbourg, he curbed the excess of the extremists, energized the indifferent masses, and headed the soldiers who turned back the invaders in a stunning series of victories. The man who led this salvation of the revolutionary nation was the quintessential youthful revolutionary Louis Antoine de Saint-Just. Saint Just gave living legitimacy to the revolutionary ideal. He was by far the youngest member of the 12-man Committee of Public Safety, which exercised executive authority in Paris. But because the committee met largely in secret in the Tuileries Palace and did not communicate in regular ways with the people, its authority depended heavily on the deeds and examples of those it sent out in the name of the nation. Unlike other members of the committee, Saint Just had no prior practical experience as a lawyer, engineer, priest, journalist, or even actor. Too young to be anything but a child of the revolution, he became in 1793 through 94 its embodiment. Legitimacy no longer lay in a place, a symbol, or a song. It lay in a revolutionary apostolate of 12. The center of ascetic coolness within this heated group was the young man from Picardy, whose very name summoned up images of sanctity. The locus of legitimacy was narrowing to a point. That ideal location where the creative and divine forces have their greatest and most potent concentration. The secular revolutionary drama was converging, like Dante's Divine Comedy, towards the point in which all time is present. And that point was not simply Saint Just himself, but the nerve center within his head. His friend Camille Desmoulins wrote that Saint Just regards his head as the keystone of the Republic and carries it on his shoulders with respect like a holy sacrament. Another fascinated contemporary felt sure that some secret was hidden behind the shade of general anxiety, the sober accents of preoccupation and defiance, and extreme coolness in tone and manners of his large head. Saint Just's leadership role cannot be explained as resulting from the characteristics now often ascribed to revolutionary leaders. He was not charismatic, lacking Robespierre's flair for the inspirational and theatrical, nor was he particularly violent. He purged Schneider and ended public executions in Strasbourg. He developed neither the bloodthirsty rhetoric of a Marat nor the theory of violence of an Oswald. Saint Just was not a moralist, and he was not essentially interested in power in the purely political sense. He ceded formal positions of authority to others and never partook in the practical play of peacetime political deliberation. Saint Just has been ascribed as an idea energized by passion. He might also be characterized as passion disciplined by an idea. His passion was the raw, sensual energy of an emancipated romantic sensibility. As a 16-year-old provincial youth, he began writing a book about a nearby medieval castle and seduced the daughter of a local aristocrat in one of its rooms. Forced to run away to Paris, he haunted the Palais Royal on the eve of the Revolution and composed in a spirits of vertigo a vast pornographic poem designed to show the general analogy of customary behaviors with madness. His tableau, which included a transform representation of the Palais Royal, made no clear distinction between heaven and hell, good and bad, humans and animals. With the outbreak of the revolution, he wrote a play in which illusion and confusion once again gave way to desire. The main character seeks to experience anything and everything in order to be original, original. Je veux vivre à mon sens désormais, narguer, flatter, parler, me taire, rire, aimer, haïr. Original, original. I want to live henceforth in my own way, to defy, flatter, speak, be silent, laugh, to love, to hate. But the passions are rarely satisfied in St. Just's early writings. They are indeed increasingly sublimated into a vague longing for some new kind of earthly greatness. L'amour n'est rien qu'un frivole besoin, et d'un grand cœur il doit être loin. Love is nothing but a frivolous need, to be kept far away from a great heart. The challenge to a great heart in 1789 through 90 was to beat with the revolution. His passions soon became absorbed in the two sides of it, the organizational and the ideological, that political leaders tended to neglect. Organizationally, he formed a national guard in the small town of Billington and led the guardsmen in such rituals as the public burning of counter-revolutionary books. Ideologically, he turned to writing on 3 tables in the open air his spirit of the revolution and his uncompleted and unpublished Nature. St. Just, in effect, withdrew from the pettiness and divisions of the old Nine Order to develop the central beliefs of the new one. He was suspicious of mass movements and considered the storming of the Bastille simply the drunkenness of slaves, and of great festivals the staging grounds for demagogues. Nor was he interested in the rights of man or the formulas of constitutions. These were the work of petty thieves in the holy sanctuary. He went beyond Rousseau's social contract, contrat social, in his call for a new social order, état social, founded solidly on nature. With no vision of the future, almost no knowledge of the past, and surprisingly little concern with the present, St. Just became the first ascetic of the revolution, cutting himself off from people in order to serve the people totally. I shall speak of all peoples, of all religions, of all laws, as if I myself did not adhere to any. I detach myself from everything in order to attach myself to everything. Rousseau had pointed the way from total loneliness to totalistic attachments. His removal from the society of his day was the indispensable psychological prerequisites to his revolutionary conception of nature as a totality saturated with moral content, at one and the same time paradise lost, and the permanent possibility of beginning everything anew. St. Just, however, provides the first suggestion of the total removal from normal attachments later called for in the revolutionary catechism of Ch3, who enjoined revolutionaries to cut every tie with the civil order, with the educated world, and with all laws, arguing that all is relative in the world and truth alone is absolute. St. Just saw the only hope for ending the circle of corruption in a return to original virtue, a secularized inversion of original sin. Original virtue implied renewed communion with the primitive simplicity of nature. Elected as a representative of the convention in September 1792, St. Just returned to Paris just after the founding of the Republic and proclaimed the convention to be the point toward which everything is compressed. The legislator converging on such a sacred spot is not to be a sophist dealing with words, but an oracle or a pontifex in the original Roman sense of a human bridge between higher truth and a confused humanity. Assigning himself this larger-than-human role at the center of power, St. Just quietly became in October secretary to the main office of the convention and the most powerful advocates of regicide on the floor of the assembly. His argument for killing the king was totally impersonal and dispassionate. The monarch was not considered a human being at all, but a universal abstraction, the king of kingdoms. He was the counterpoint to the new point of sovereign power in the convention, and St. Just impelled that body forward to the revolutionary point of no return, arguing against a compassion which involuntarily corrupts one's energy. His radical simplification provided at last a compelling metaphor for the French nation to replace that of the king's body just as it was being served. He revived the old image of the human body itself, which personalized the agony and afflictions of the nation in a way that the mechanistic metaphors of the 18th century never could. The enemies of the Republic are in its intestines. Its leaders are largely worms. The best hope lies in a greater heart and great nerves, as well as in the audacity of the magnanimous virtue. St. Just expressed model revolutionary contempt for individual good deeds in a sick society. The particular good one does is a palliative. One must wait for a general sickness great enough for general opinion to feel the need for measures capable of doing good. That which produces the general good is always terrible. His image of the nation as a single body made any loss of territory as painful as an amputation. In the early spring of 1793, he saw the nation threatened with death if division is attached to territory, and set off on the first of 3 special missions to rally the resistance in the exposed provinces. Working on the Constitutional Committee of the Convention, he failed in his campaign to create an 84-member executive formed from a nerve center in each department, but he succeeded in inserting into the Constitution of 1793 an unprecedented constitutional provision against ever making peace with a foreign power occupying any French territory. In his great speech on October 10, 1793, calling for a revolutionary dictatorship, St. Just denounced all traditional government as a world of paper. The prolixity of governmental correspondence and orders is a mark of inertia. It is impossible to govern without laconicism. The bureaus have replaced the monarchy. The demon of writing makes war upon us, and we cannot govern. With the Committee of Public Safety now placed in the center, the cause of all misfortune in the nation had been determined to be the vicissitude of passions. The only passion that could give constancy to the nation prior to the inculcation of virtue was terror, which he saw as a means not of punishing crime, but of faming popular energy and audacity. Although St. Just's argument for terror was reluctant and his use in Alsace limited, his legislation of it encouraged the fresh wave of pedagogic violence that began with the public execution of Marie Antoinette on October 16th. St. Just left for Strasbourg the next day. On the day following, a new play opened in Paris that introduced the metaphor of a volcano into the previously tranquil image of an island utopia. Despite the urgent need for explosives at the front, the Committee of Public Safety authorized the delivery of 20 pounds of saltpeter and powder to the Theater of the Republic to produce the onstage volcanic eruption that pitched rocks and smoldering charcoal into the audience at the end of Sylvain Marchal's Last Judgment of Kings. This was precisely the image that St. Just had used long before the Revolution in connection with his first discussion of terror, and Maréchal's enormously successful play in a way substituted a new natural image as a focus of awe and terror in a place of the guillotine, which St. Just had avoided using for public executions in Strasbourg. There was a suggestion of orgasm in the St. Just Maréchal image of eruption, just as there was a suggestion of nudity in Maréchal's subsequent opera depicting a priest shedding his robes to renounce my imposture in the eyes of nature. St. Just, too, turned to the emotive power of music. On the way to Strasbourg, he sang Italian songs and left behind in Paris a lost opera which he had worked on with an Italian composer for an opening just a few nights after Maréchal's Last Judgment. His Silico, ou Les Nègres, was apparently built around the intense friendship of two brothers involved in slaying a tyrant. This sense of masculine comradeship in arms enabled St. Just to identify the nation with brotherhood in an almost physiological way. Brought up entirely by his mother and sisters, St. Just discovered La Fraternité along with La Nation. On his first mission of mobilization to the provinces in the spring of 1793, he wrote that the nation is not at all the sun, it is the community of affections. His posthumously published vision of an ideal society promotes his concept of brother-in-arms in quasi-erotic attachment. He proposes that every 21-year-old declare his friendships publicly in the temple and repeat the ritual at the end of every winter. If a man leaves a friend, he is required to explain the motive behind it before the people, and is banished if he refuses, or says he has no friends, or renounces his belief in friendship. Friends are to fight in battle together, are held responsible for each other's crimes, and those who remain united all their life are to be buried in the same tomb. St. Just's worshipful companion on the mission to Strasbourg, Lebas, felt the same kind of fraternal loyalty that St. Just in return showed to Robespierre. St. Just never distanced himself from Robespierre at the end, as he might easily have done. He never married, and his engagement to Lebas' sister seems to have been mainly a token of friendship for his companion in Alsace. Militant fraternity in the service of the nation allowed no room for sorority, or indeed for fraternization with women. Saint Just and Lebas destroyed Schneider in Strasbourg for indulging not just in distractive sex and excessive violence, but also for taking a German wife, Sarah Stamm, at the height of the battles with foreign invaders in December. Schneider had threatened both the ethnic and the sexual homogeneity of the French legions. His wife was executed along with him in April 1794. A foreign threat was once again coupled with feminine temptation in the cas of Etta Pomme d'Aleder, the radical feminist within Bonneville's Confederation, who was denounced for foreign links. In late 1793, the nation was applying standards of loyalty that were more exclusive, Spartan, and homophile than anyone educated in the cosmopolitanism of the Enlightenment could have imagined. At the popular level, too, a sudden surge of feminine participation in revolutionary activity was permanently repressed during the nationalist mobilization of late 1793. An Amazon corps of 4,000 young women had appeared briefly in Bordeaux, and a feminine friend of liberty and equality in Lyon. Within Paris, women took the most violent initiative and surpassed by a good deal the fury of men in the debates of May 31st, 1793, which moved power out of the assembly and into the streets. All of this feminine activity vanished along with the revolutionary Republican Society, a Parisian society of female sans-culottes, which became the first target of the Jacobin assault upon the popular movements. In the fall of 1793, its demands for women to wear the red cap of male revolutionaries outraged the central revolutionary leaders. On October 31st, the convention outlawed all female clubs and societies. The anti-feminine sentiment that swept through Paris was almost certainly related to the parallel process of mobilizing men for military service. The unprecedented levée en masse involved tearing thousands of young men away from their mothers and linking them together by the masculine mystic of militant nationalism. Female and foreign identities were already blended together. The word for Austrian was spelled in the feminine form even when French grammar called for a masculine ending. Whether or not the red hat was a phallic symbol, as Joël Barrel contended, the wearing of it by women in Paris clearly seemed to threaten the male leadership. Fabre de Galantine, one of the principal choreographers of the revolutionary festivals, invoked a kind of domino theory of prospective feminine annexations of male weaponry / sexuality. After the bonnet rouge, women would take the gun belts and then the gun itself, he warned. The official reports to the convention on the role of women urged against any participation in politics by a sex that is cogently exposed to terror, error, and seduction. Women, by their constitution, are open to an exaltation which could be ominous in public life. The interests of the state would soon be sacrificed to all kinds of disruption and disorder that hysteria can produce. The hysteria was largely in the minds of the men who voted, with only one dissenting vote in the entire convention to outlaw all women's associations. In this atmosphere, Marie Antoinette, who had been relatively neglected as a target of abuse in the early years of the Revolution, became a target for a savage hatred that boarded at times on sadism. Her execution on October 16th began a series of public guillotines of the great symbolic women of the era in a short space of time. Charlotte Corday, the killer of Marat, Olympe de Gouges, author of a Declaration of the Rights of Women, and finally the Girondist leader, Madame Roland, on November 8th. All provided spectacular executions for the Parisian masses. The popular imagination, which had already substituted inexpensive etchings for aristocratic engravings, received its xenophobic icon in the form of David's pencil sketch of an ugly but still arrogant Marie Antoinette on the way to her humiliating end. The contrast is striking in both medium and message, with the idealized neoclassical male nude warriors that were to dominate David's vast oil canvases and glorification of La Grande Nation. Subconscious fear of revenge might well explain the strange apprehension that's later haunted both Robespierre and Saint-Just of being assassinated by women. As the very embodiment of militant male fraternité, Saint-Just wrote to Robespierre from Alsace that there were too many laws, too few examples. In the last months of his life, Saint-Just observed the strictest austerity of habits, avoided any contact with women, and led the struggle against indifference and factionalism. Late in April of 1794, he journeyed to the front with Lebas one final time to share in the great victory at Fleurus late in June. When he vanquished Austrians before the Charleroi, brought him an envelope with terms of surrender on June 25th, and began speaking to him of honorable arrangements, Saint-Just interrupted them to say that he would not open it and demanded unconditional surrender. We cannot either honor or dishonor you here, just as it is not in your power to either dishonor or to honor the French nation. There is nothing in common between you and me. Ironically, the victory that assured the survival of the nation removed the need for terror and for the emergency that had justified the first governmental body ever to describe itself officially as revolutionary. Robespierre and Saint-Just were both executed, and the Committee of Public Safety dissolved a month after the victory. As befits the chiaroscuro politics of apocalypse, there was one final fabulous feast of fraternity just before the fall of Robespierre. If the Feast of Federation in 1790 had represented the first day of the sublime dream of fraternity, Robespierre's spectacular Feast of the Supreme Being on June 8, 1794, suggested the beginning of its unending summer. The winter, the foreign armies, and the guillotine all seemed to have passed, and the last stage in revolutionary simplification had occurred with Robespierre's election as president of the convention and proclamation of a new religion of maximum simplicity, the cult of the Supreme Being. Designed to be the first in a series of regular national festivals, the Feast of the Supreme Being turned the volcano into a peaceful mountain of floral beauty and choral unison on the field of Mars. Women were admitted and given a separate but equal place in the hitherto homophilic rituals. Even the ascetic Saint-Just saw in the proceedings the beginnings of a pedagogic program that might truly inculcate virtue in a corrupt world. Here at last was Sparta plus song. Paris had been transformed not into a city based on some pre-existing concept, but into an internal model of assembly, simplicity, and joy. In hailing the Supreme Being, Robespierre proclaimed that its true priest was nature. Its temple, the universe, its cults, virtue, its festivals, the joy of a great people, renewing the sweet bonds of universal fraternity. The euphoria was short-lived, though much of the new secular simplicity survived together with many of the national festivals in the cult of theophilanthropy under the Directory. The fraternal meals of the last weeks of Robespierre's rule and the fraternal embrace which ended the festival were followed by a final fratricidal burst of terror and factionalism which brought down the emergency governments. St. Just illustrated within the leadership the mass phenomenon within the populace of dedicated youth soldiers harnessing their passion to a national cause. He was a prototype for the aesthetic revolutionary of the future. Through him, the locus of legitimacy moved away from physical place and political formula to living example. That example was made awesome by the icy calm, the sang-froid, he maintained throughout the quarreling and violence of his last days. St. Just had the serenity of one who had surrendered himself long before death to a transcendent ideal, to the spirit of the revolution, and idealized the goal of human regeneration. The passion of Saint Just was cold rather than hot. It imploded into intelligence rather than exploding into indulgence. That intelligence charted a course of constancy and toughness in the turbulent final weeks of rule by the Committee of Public Safety. He resisted both Robespierre's apparent moves to make peace with foreign enemies and his tendency to personalize his struggles with moderates. At the same time, St. Just seems to have been far bolder than Robespierre in attempting to appeal over the heads of the convention to the revolutionary army in a final effort to forestall the conservative drift. Whatever his exact role, St. Just retained till the end a cool contempt for the dust of ordinary life, the softness and idealness of those who gave themselves over to the spirit of corruption rather than to that of regeneration. The spirit of the revolution was resisted not just by the force of things, about which he often impatiently complains. There was also the lack of force among revolutionaries themselves, the backsliding from l'esprit de la révolution into le bon esprit of the aristocratic salons. L'esprit is a sophist, which leads all virtues to the scaffold. Within the proud head of Saint Just, as he went to la Sainte Guillotine, may have lain that most sublime of all contradictions in revolutionary thoughts, the need for a tyranny of virtue to prevent the recurrence of tyranny surrounded by vice. His apparent attempt to bypass the convention with the army, his revelation that Augustus Caesar was his greatest hero of antiquity, his mysterious references to Oliver Cromwell, and Robespierre's final likening of him to Charles IX, author of the Saint Bartholomew's Day Massacre, all indicate that this just saint, who sought no personal power, may have felt impelled to justify absolute power. The national ideal of fraternity reached its apogee in the execution of Saint Just, following the Roman suicide of his younger revolutionary brother Lebas. The rival ideal of communitarian equality appeared during the Thermidorian reaction that followed. Its leader, Babeuf, was, like Saint Just, a native of Picardy, with a similar nostalgia for agrarian simplicity and antique virtue in a corrupted world. Its supreme cultural expression was not Robespierre's singing festival of fraternity, but Sylvain Maréchal's prosaic manifesto of equals. If Maréchal took his image of revolution as volcano from Saint Just, he derived the more important idea of a revolutionary second coming from Robespierre. Maréchal's concept of the political upheaval of 1789 through 94 as the harbinger for a second social revolution arises directly from Robespierre's valedictory at the Feast of the Supreme Being. A new world has appeared beyond the limits of the world. Everything has changed in the physical order. Everything must change in the moral and political order. Half of the world revolution is already done. The other half must be completed. Equality, the vision of community. The third new ideal to rise out of the French Revolution was that of communauté, a new type of social and economic community based on equality. Though this ideal was the least articulated at the time, and the least important politically throughout the 19th century, it has important roots in the revolutionary era. The revolutionary egalitarianism of Babeuf, Maréchal, and Restif de la Bretonne is the progenitor of modern communism and of revolutionary socialism, the rival ideal of revolutionary nationalism. The new egalitarian communalism was rooted in Rousseau's call for a social contract that would repudiate inequality among men and legitimize authority by permitting the general will to unify in community on a new basis. Rousseau's contract was generally interpreted in purely political terms during the French Revolution, but the germs of a social economic interpretation also emerged from two sources: the rhetoric of the American Revolution and the reality of the French countryside. The American Declaration of Independence offered as its first philosophical justification of separation from England the ideological assertion that all men are created equal. By pronouncing this to be self-evident, the Declaration also initiates the tendency of revolutionary publicists to proclaim the obviousness of truths that had never before been thought about by more than a handful. The more secular French Declaration of Rights in 1789 proclaimed men to be equal only in respect of their rights, but later revolutionaries thought also of the pursuit of happiness proclaimed by the Americans, and the Radical Constitution of 1793 affirmed, as the Americans never did, that common happiness, le bonheur commun, was the aim of society, and oppression against the body of society, le corps social, a justification for insurrection. The proto-communist idea that common happiness might be realized at the expense of private property ownership began to appear relatively early in the cosmopolitan Parisian circles that ultimately proved anathema to the nationalistic Jacobin leaders. A petition on the agrarian laws by an Anglo-Irishman, James Rutledge, who called himself a citizen of the universe, urged in 1790 the establishment of a social order, état social, with no ownership of property. This idea of a lex agraria, a modified land distribution in the manner of Tiberius and Cainus Gracchus during the Roman Republic, was systematically propagated at the same time by Bonneville's principal collaborator in the social circle, the Abbé Fauchet. The idea became a special favorite of the provincial clergy who identified with their rural parishes. The Abbé Cournant went even further, declaring that in the state of nature, the domain of man is the entire earth, and arguing that all landowners should have plots of equal in size, non-hereditary, and non-transferable, Other red curates found an almost religious exaltation in identifying with the masses and articulating a social ideal that went beyond Parisian politics to suggest secular salvation. Thus, Pierre d'Olivier was almost saintly in the self-denigration as he petitioned for acceptance into the Bonneville-Fauché Universal Confederation. "I am," he said, "the lowliest of men, simple and even too simple, without knee breeches and without a hearth, sans culottes et sans feu, but not without passion for the work of bringing into being the kingdom of universal justice." This universal ideal found local roots in the grievances of the French countryside. These were brought to Paris in May 1790 by François-Noël Babeuf, a young prisoner from Picardy, who had led a local tax revolt against the continued levying of indirect taxes by the National Assembly. Babeuf had been brought up in the country, trained as a commissioner of land deeds, and studied land utilization, but with relatively little interest in politics. In Paris, he discovered the concept of the agrarian law by establishing links first with Rutledge and then with the Universal Confederation, which gave an ideological cast to his earlier primitive ideals of a collective lease, ferme collective, and the redistribution to the poor of confiscated church lands. His opposition to the moderate political revolution was dramatically signaled by an attack on Lafayette in the summer of 1790. His letter of a deputy from Picardy was distributed in the Palais Royal, where Babeuf drew up plans to publicize a radical feminist Confédération des Dames, perhaps in connection with the Universal Confederation. He identified a communal government in Paris with local rural authority in common opposition to the parasitic national government. Elected as administrator of the Department of the Somme in September 1782, he returned to Paris to adopt in the spring of 1793 the name Gracchus in his quest for real economic equality, égalité de fait, and some new kind of general happiness unknown throughout the ages. It is to that revolutionary search that we must now turn. The conspiracy of Babeuf. The origins of the social revolutionary tradition, no less than those of the National Revolutionary, lie in the military mobilization of 1793. Social revolutionaries like Babeuf, unlike the nationalistic majority typified by other native Picardy, Saint-Just had a special affinity for the international military units that formed briefly in 1793. Babeuf had known Rutledge even before the revolution, and late in 1789 he signaled on a regular correspondent from Provincial Roy for the International Courrier de l'Europe published in London. Arriving in Paris in February 1793, Babeuf joined the agitational Legion of People's Liberators, serving as secretary to the Franco-Haitian Claude Fournier, who had led the storming of the Bastille from the Palais Royal and kept the name The American. He then briefly became secretary to a Dutch officer in charge of the Batavian Legion before retreating to the food administration of the Paris Commune. When Fournier was not chosen to lead the revolutionary assault against the conservative uprising in the Vendée, Babeuf appears to have despaired in finding a meaningful role in the exciting events of 1783. During a period when nationalistic armies were singing La Marseillaise rather than reading proto-socialist tracts, Babeuf wrote to his protector Sylvain Maréchal that he envied Rousseau's capacity to sustain himself by writing music. I have no such talents, and am therefore more unhappy, but I shall learn to compose with typography. He became a master composer in his chosen medium. In and out of prison during the Reign of Terror, Babeuf repeatedly turned to typography and journalism. His perennial protector, Maréchal, directed him first to Bonneville's press of the Social Circle in April, and then to his own Révolution de Paris in December 1793. After the overthrow of Robespierre, newspapers became more of an arm of struggle than a source of information, and Babeuf founded in September 1784 his own arm, Journal of the Freedom of the Press, hailing journalism as the means of keeping alive the revolutionary spirit and struggling to implement a constitution of 1793. His ideas soon went beyond radical republicanism and the denunciation of Robespierre's tyranny. He began to discover posthumously in Robespierre the genius in whom resided true ideas of regeneration. And in 1795, he founded his Tribune of the People, the first journal in history to be the legal arm of an extra-legal revolutionary conspiracy. Babeuf's Tribune was an organ of strategy, not just an outlet of rhetoric. Its criticism of first revolutionary journals and its effort to define a coherent line make it a distinct ancestor of Lenin's Iskra and Pravda, and its prospectus defined a social goal as well as a moral mission. At the head of each issue stood the italicized phrase, "The aim of society is the happiness of the community." Babeuf rejected the rights of property guaranteed in the Declaration of Rights of Man in favor of the states of community, arguing that society should provide common happiness through perfect equality. Alongside the journalistic proclamations of a new social ideal came a new type of revolutionary organization. The national network of Jacobin clubs, which had been largely destroyed by the overthrow of Robespierre, was no longer taken as the model. In a long manifesto of November 1794, on the need and means of organizing a true popular society, he likened the relationship between earlier clubbists and the masses to that of the Christian sermonizer vis-a-vis the benevolent congregation. He called for a militant society to end all subservience to the aristocracy of riches and to begin the reign of republican virtues. Arrested in March 1795, Babeuf used his 6 months' imprisonment in Arras to perfect his ideas of a true popular society. All were to be equal and dedicated to developing collectively commerce, agriculture, and in a striking addition for this period, industry. Such a society was to come about through a new geographical base and a new militant organization. In an important letter of July 28, Babeuf provided perhaps the first outline of a program for completing the revolution and anticipated the latter idea of a secure base area for militant revolutionaries. He speaks variously of our Vendée, the sacred mountain, or the plebeian Vendée, advancing by degrees, consolidating to the extent that we gain territory we should be able to organize. Enemies of the human race fear the militants of numerous phalanxes by the revolutionaries who will give up their traditions, occupations to advance the struggle. Babeuf fled backwards in time and forwards in revolutionary consciousness when he moved from the ideal of a Roman legion to that of a Greek phalanx. as the model for revolutionary struggle. His effort to form a phalanx of sans-culottes in the spring of 1793 failed, but the image reappeared in St. Just's call for new forms of socio-military support for the revolutionary government in October. Anarchism includes the deracinated order of the human race, saw the Revolutionary Army of France not as a national body at all, but as the new Greek fightings for all civilization, as phalanxes of interpreters, of translators of the universal law. Babeuf used the term phalange for the formations needed to realize the social as well as the military discipline of his new communauté, and the term was to have a venerable history and subsequent revolutionary usage. The original phalanx, in search of a new society, arose directly out of revolutionary journalism. Late in 1795, the Club of the Pantheon began meeting by torchlight in the crypt of the convent of Sainte Geneviève, the cave of Brigands, to discuss the program of Babeuf's Tribune. Babeuf, who had returned to Paris in September 1795, assumed leadership of the club, which claimed 2,000 members. Accused of fomenting civil war, Babeuf invented the classical revolutionary epos that such a war already existed, the war of the rich against the poor. He accepted with pride the accusations of his foes and his friends, and foes that his friends were anarchists, men who want to be always making revolution. In November, Babeuf published the first in the new genre of social revolutionary manifestos, which would culminate in Marx's Communist Manifesto in 1848. Babeuf's Plebeian Manifesto was both a philosophical inventory, a manifest of what was needed to bring about equality in fact and the common good, and a call for a popular uprising, a manifestation, greater, more solemn, more general than has ever been done before. When a police raid led by the young Napoleon Bonaparte shut down the Club of the Panthéon on February 28, 1796, Babeuf and his associates turned their attention inward on their conspiracy of the equals, seeking now to retrieve rather than reveal the dictatorial methods of Robespierre. They constituted themselves on March 30th as the Secret Directory of Public Safety. Decisions of the Directory were reached collectively and announced anonymously. In place of individual signatures on leaflets and letters, there was the designation Public Safety, or the words of the Revolutionary Trinity in triangular form, with common happiness substituted for fraternity. Each member of the Central Insurrectionary Committee was to be concurrently active in other areas from which he could report back to the inner circle. The secret center was to communicate outwards through a network of 12 trusted instructors, with each responsible for mobilizing a broader insurrectionary force in one of the 12 arrondissements of Paris. The secret directory met almost every evening. It published in printings of at least 2,000 not only the theoretical Tribune du Peuple, but also a fly sheet, L'éclaireur du Peuple, for the ordinary worker. Methods of mobilization included the active enlistment of affiliates by small group or activists or groupists who gathered around newly or prominently displayed revolutionary posters. The number of those loosely recruited grew to 17,000, and the conspiracy increasingly focused on the army as the crucial recruiting ground for insurrection. The decision to put a military committee of the conspiracy directly in touch with this secret directory enabled an informer to discover the inner circle and to expose it to police arrest. The conspirators were guardians not only of the revolutionary hope for social equality, but also of the vision of Saint Just that true revolution would take men beyond politics. All governments, and not just some governments, would somehow be destroyed by a true revolution. To politiker, was a verb invoked with contempt by Babeuf, whose plebeian manifesto ended with a call for total upheaval, bouleversement total. May everything return to chaos, and out of chaos may there emerge a new and regenerated world. The conspiracy envisioned the establishment of a great national community in which all goods were owned in common and shared equally. This community was eventually to supplant by either attractive example or coercive force all other systems of political and economic authority. Imperceptibly within Babeuf's conspiracy arose the myth of the unfinished revolution, the idea that the political upheaval in France was only the forerunner of a second, more crotinous social revolution. Babeuf's journal called in 1795 for the reality rather than the appearance of revolution. Ce n'est plus dans les esprits qu'il faut faire la révolution, c'est dans les choses. A few months later, in 1796, Babeuf explained that the epoch of these great revolutions had created a situation where a general upheaval in the system of property ownership is inevitable, where revolt of the poor against the rich is a necessity that nothing can prevent. Already in his plebeian manifesto, Babeuf had begun to develop a sense of messianic mission, invoking the names of Moses, Joshua, and Jesus, as well as Rousseau, Robespierre, and Saint Just. He had claimed Christ as a co-athlete and had written in prison a new history of the life of Jesus Christ. Most of the conspirators shared this belief in Christ as a sans-culotte at heart, if not a prophet of revolution. The strength of the red cuirassiers within the social revolutionary camp intensified the need to keep Christian ideas from weakening revolutionary dedication. Anarchist Cloutz helped break up Bonneville's social circle by attacking the Abbé Fauchet for extolling the levelers of the Puritan Revolution. Cloutz juxtaposed the certainty of nature, always living, always young, always the same, to the ambiguities and contradictions of the Gospels. The antic ideal that the Babevists adopted as an alternative to Christianity was that of the Spartans, militant, aesthetic, rooted in land, and deeply hostile to the artificially cerebral and crassly commercial life of the new Athens, bourgeois Paris under the Directorate. But the only sure antidotes to the vestigial appeal of Christian ideas lay in atheism, which was the special contribution to the Babeuf conspiracy of Sylvain Maréchal, the man who called himself l'HSD, l'homme sans Dieu, and produced for the revolutionary movement a totally secular version of the messianic idea of a second coming. Maréchal had repeatedly declared that the revolution will not be complete until men share the fruits of the earth as they share the rays of the sun. His neglected corrective to the revolution, written at the height of revolutionary exaltation in 1793, insisted that the revolution is not complete. The revolution is still only in words, and all in theory. It does not yet exist in fact. Maréchal said the revolution was not yet real because men were not happier. They would never find happiness without higher principles, and they would never discover such principles under conditions of social inequality. Tant qu'il y aura des valets, des maîtres, des pauvres, des riches, la révolution n'est point faite. In another study of 1795, Maréchal added an element of urgency, suggesting that the preceding purely political revolution may have made life even worse. Merchants have become aristocrats, 1,000 times more dreadful than the feudal nobility. It was only a short step to the prophecy of the Manifesto of Equals which Maréchal wrote for Babeuf's group. The French Revolution is but the precursor of another revolution, far greater, far more solemn, which will be the last. Babeuf was arrested and the conspiracy destroyed on May 10, 1796. In his court defense and final letters, he appeared sure of his role than of his ideas, dealing with the government often as if he were another government. He viewed himself as the prosecutor of something new, and bade farewell in a moving last letter to his family as he prepared for a perfectly virtuous sleep. The conspiracy sounded a reprise on many themes of the revolutionary faith. The solar myth of the revolution blended with the café breeding ground of activism in the chant des égaux sung at the café des bains chinois. Sortez de la nuit profonde, le soleil luit pour tout le monde. This song was itself the revolutionary counter to the Réveil du Peuple, introduced after Thermidor as the reactionaries' rival to La Marseillaise. Just as the greatest Christian theologian had defined God as the coincidence of opposites, so Babeuf took the new faith and revolution to the level of sublime paradox. The justification for launching a new revolution was to terminate the revolution. The means of ending the spirit of domination was to obey an elite hierarchy, and the way to avoid the tyranny of factions was to accept a single leader. The miraculous move to true popular sovereignty was to take place on a springtime Day of the People, in which some 17,000 direct supporters were to rise up in Paris. At signals from bells and trumpets, this apocalyptic political act would bring an end to politics. Born out of the vision of island utopias, this realization of instant equality planned to banish opponents immediately to pre-selected islands in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Few accepted Babeuf's egalitarian ideal, but many were haunted by his example. There were, moreover, some grounds for fearing that the conspiracy had foreign links. Representatives of the radical Batavian Republic, the revolutionary regime proclaimed amidst continuing chaos in the Netherlands in 1795, and the first anywhere to adopt officially the revolutionary slogan Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, had some contacts with the French conspirators. Babeuf had once served in the Batavian Legion, and a major uprising by cannoneers of the National Guard occurred in Amsterdam on the same day that Babeuf was arrested in Paris. There were echoes of the Babeuf conspiracy in the two countries that in many ways dominated the revolutionary tradition during the early 19th century, Italy and Poland. Babeuf's Italian collaborators sought early in 1796 to persuade the ruling Directory in Paris to support an uprising of popular movements in Italy that would lead to a general revolution and a unitary state. Aligned with France, Guglielmo Series, Babeuf's former secretary, and Buonarroti, his former historian, sought to organize and promote a revolution in Piedmont. that would confront the French authorities with a fait accompli and push the directorate closer to the Babavist position. Buonarroti argued eloquently against French military rule in Italy, urging instead the prompt formation of popular authorities by the local populace, but his revolutionary vision was derided by French military leaders, who launched under Napoleon a conventional military invasion in April. The entry of French troops into Italian villages was celebrated, however, not with local uprisings, but with Catholic masses, prompting a friend of Buonarroti's to complain bitterly. One does not found a democracy with a Magnificat. Instead of illuminating churches, it would be better to light up, that is, to burn feudal castles. Frustrated in Piedmont, Babavist activists moved on to Milan, where they briefly helped organize a local militia and introduce the Italian tricolor prior to the arrival of Napoleon. The Babavists helped form the hierarchical revolutionary organization, the Society of Lights, or Black League, founded by Cyrus and other in Bologna late in 1798. Though this organization failed to realize what Godeschal had called the best opportunity to unify Italy prior to 1860, it did leave a legacy of experience with secret nationwide revolutionary organization, which was later to benefit the Carbonari. The echo of Babavism from occupied Poland was more distant and muffled. A conspiratorial peasant organization of 1796 through 97, led by a veteran of both the American and French wars of revolution, proclaimed the slogan "Equality or Death," and many have been influenced by the Babeuf conspiracy. Within France, there were flickers of revival among the surviving Babevists, notably in July 1799, when they gathered to form a society of the Friends of Equality and Freedom. Such activity was snuffed out with the arrival of Napoleon later that year. Yet the hope did not die that the revolution was not yet complete and might still produce a new morality, if not a new type of man. This coming revolution was to be Babeuf's bouleversement total. Such expectations were intensified by conservative critics like Burke's German translator and the future secretary of Metternich, who popularized the phrase total revolution. What was the nature of the revolution yet to come? There was a difference, and at time open conflict between the Saint-Just Robespierre ideal of a moral revolution within a nation and the Babevists' belief in a universal social revolution. But there were human links between the two ideas through the two most important surviving members of the conspiracy, Buonarroti and Maréchal. For both of them, social and moral revolution were one and the same thing. Their shadowy careers point, as we shall see, to some surprising philosophical and organizational roots common to both ideals.
The communism of Restif. The revolutionary concept of communauté may have come less from the high culture of the Enlightenment than from the low culture of popular journalism. Babeuf had been influenced by the year 2440, the prophetic utopian work of one great chronicler of Parisian life, Sébastien Mercier. The word communism was introduced to the world by Mercier's friend and fellow journalistic chronicler of Paris, Restif de la Bretonne, the Rousseau of the gutter, the Jean-Jacques des Halles. Restif's verbal invention came out of a life that was literally fantastic. His literary production filled nearly 250 volumes with cosmic, social, and sexual fantasies that no one has yet fully cataloged. His writings anticipated everything from interplanetary travel to atomic energy and encompassed almost every imaginable sexual fetish and perversion. Inexhaustible erotic energy made him as compulsive as he was creative. He was possessed with the mystique of the new journalistic medium, inventing hundreds of new words and bewildering variety of topographical formats. His attachment to printing was almost physiological. He worked for many years as a typesetter and often composed his works directly on his home typesetting equipment without a manuscript. Every aspect of the formal production of a literary work contributed to his total message. His choice of typography, use of italics, overuse of capitalization, often in the middle of words, misuse of accents, and endless invention of pseudonyms and neologisms reflected an almost religious fascination with the production of the printed word. Legitimacy for the partisans of egalitarian community flowed from the printing press. Restif's only political activity during the revolutionary era was his attempt, beginning in 1789, to organize a productive association for printers and typographers. His works provided an unparalleled descriptive panorama of lower-class life. Distinctions between fact, fiction, and fantasy were swept away by his gushing stream of consciousness. Restif remained the purest form of self-centered intellectual from his youthful days in rural Brigandy to his later years as a nocturnal streetwalker in Paris. Wherever he was, Restif lived only in his own self-created world of worlds, his maze of monologue. In 1785, Restif published a review of a book describing a communal experiment in Marseille. He cited a letter of 1782 from the book's author, who described himself as an auteur communiste, the first known appearance in the print of this word. The author, the educational theorist Joseph Alexandre Victor Upaille de Fuvea, later submitted a vast utopian educational plan to his friend in Aix-Mirabeau when he set off for the States General in 1789. He lived to write a Republican Koran during the Revolution, and to propose to all citizens wear green uniforms with pink trimmings as they marched to work daily in a grand promenade de la communauté. But his most remarkable work was the project for a philosophical community of 1779, which may be considered the first full blueprint for a secular communist society in the modern world. Upaille made a moral and literary announcement in 1778 that he was taking up a subscription to set up his ideal plan for social and political life near Marseille. His plan was a potpourri of utopian ideas, the communal idea of the Moravian Brethren, combined with the legislative ideas of Malblai, the social theories of the New World and the New Alois, that is, the unspoiled Indians and the natural man of Rousseau's Nouvelle Héloïse, all would speak French, the language of reason and truth, and children would be educated communally up to the age of 5 to ensure freedom from past prejudices. Rigid tables of exercises and studies were prescribed for subsequent education, and a plan géométral drawn up for the community featuring 2 large statues, the divine Plato, prince of legislators, inventor of the communal life, communauté de vie, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, citizen of Geneva, investigator of the principles of human education. A privileged exit from this house of meeting of the community was shown, leading to a special place for communities formed by children married within the philosophical community. This was presumably a kind of philosophical master race living in equality and union and the most perfect sociability. A Spartan people, the true nursery of a better race of men than ours. But where was the new Spartan race to come from? Was there anyone who might really aspire to set up the community of moral economic rule based on an egalitarian community of goods? There is no record of any serious attempts being made in the vicinity of Marseille, but there is in the text ample and altogether prophetic indication that he thought it might most easily be realized in Russia. Huppe, like many philosophes, was inspired by the ambitious reform plans of Catherine the Great, the prototypical enlightened despot. Her pretentious early writings led him to believe it might be possible to put into practice the beautiful laws of the Republic of Plato, to create an entire city of philosophers, which would be called Platonopolis. Such an ideal community would be easier to establish in Russia than in the West, precisely because it was an authoritarian society with coercive power, where each lord could more easily become the father and benefactor of his serfs. Huppe, however, was an unnoticed minor figure. His letter to Restif in 1782 had been prompted by reading the later's seminal Le Paysan Perverti, ou Les Dangers de la Ville. In the 4th volume of his work, Restif announced his intention to provide a new Emile that would enrich the pedagogic ideas of Rousseau's original Emile with a social program inspired by Rousseau's discourse on inequality. This section of Restif's work concluded with a model statute for a bourg commun, in which private property was limited to immediate needs for clothing and furniture. For Restif, the noble peasant had been perverted by advancing civilization. He could be restored to wholeness only by the establishment of a new philosophical community based on the sentiments of the best authors and the principles of the New World. In 1781, Restif wrote a literary fantasy describing an egalitarian society where there was only one law. All must be common among equals. Each must work for the common good. All must take an identical part in work. This was in many ways the most sophisticated of all the utopian islands to appear in pre-revolutionary literature. It depicted not only the innate goodness of the inhabitants of the island of Christina, but also the compatibility of their unspoiled egalitarianism with advanced ideas brought back to the island from Mega Patagonia, an idealized version of France. Thus, the French Daedalus sought not just to fly away from a decadent France to an island paradise, but rather to rescue an egalitarian society from the people of the Knights, ruling over it by providing an 18-article Codex of the Mega-Patagonians, which decreed the common ownership of all property and the uniform work obligations that the oppressed islanders secretly wanted. An even more ambitious work in the following year introduced the term community of goods and suggested the manner of establishing equality in all nations of Europe. Thus Restif was able to refer his correspondent and self-proclaimed communist author to works of his own that had already taken his communist ideas beyond the outline in Le Paysan Perverti. Communism may in part be one of the new ideas blown back across the Atlantic by the original revolutionary wind from America. Both Hope's project and Restif's Le Paysan were conceived in 1776. In his commentary on Hope's letter, Restif argued that the people of the Brothers of Philadelphia have opened the possibility for that union and that community of moral and economic rule that includes all vain and external distinctions. Restif spoke of the coming of a supernatural community that would end the peril rivalry which confounds states and drags all of them together into ruin and crime. Even more crucial to the communism of Restif was its close identification with the peasantry. The peasants had been perverted by the cities, but retained the moral force to build communism. On the eve of the revolution, Restif wrote a pamphlet urging the peasants be admitted as a fourth estate to the Estates Generals, and on the first anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, Restif wrote another pamphlet warning the rural Frenchmen coming to Paris for the Feast of the Federation against the evils of the society. Although Restif prided himself on belonging to no club or party, his writings of the early revolutionary period seemed to envision a further uprising, soulèvement général, to support his broad plan for social justice. Mettez toute la nation en communauté. Faites une insurrection générale. Partagez. From his appeal for agrarian communism submitted to the Estates General in 1789, he turned in late 1792 and early 1793 to the convention with an appeal for what he now called his plan de communauté générale. In 1793, Restif used the term communism as his own for the first time to describe the fundamental change in ownership that would obviate the need for any further redistribution of goods and property. His detailed exposition of communism and regular use of the word began the following year with a regulation for the establishment of a general community of the human race. In his Monsieur Nicholas, or the Human Heart Unveiled, in this work, Restif insisted that the absolute elimination of private property would end human need, but not individual initiative. He saw communism as a more effective cause for rallying the French army than the uncompleted republic of the Directory. The republicanism of the post-revolutionary United States was also attacked for providing only nominal equality. In a communist society, all citizens would accept the obligation to work and to declare publicly their annual production goals at the beginning of each year. Neither possessions nor professions could be passed on from father to son. Communism was the best of 8 possible forms of government, and would give birth to a new political system, the only one worthy of reasonable men. Only a communist order could bring to an end seduction by money and the attendant corruption and vice. Restiv's proposed regulations for the human race proposed communal ownership, communal eating, and a new monnaie communismale to replace traditional forms of exchange. As the revolution progressed, Restiv intensified his commitment to his communist ideal, which he traced back to his Andograph of 1782. But it was a lonely vision, and Restiv had to print many of his own books in his basement in such small editions that many have been lost. He printed Monsieur Nicolas in an edition of 200 on paper, of such low quality that the book remained largely unknown for nearly a century. His posthumous letters, also written in 1796, could not be published until 1802. Then they were immediately confiscated by the Napoleonic censorship. He compared the ideal communist society of the future with other societies by describing a series of interplanetary visits, appropriately in view of his erotic interest and preoccupations. Venus was the site for his communist society of the future. The manuscript of his final communist fantasy, The Cage and the Birds, has been altogether lost. And all we know is that the one line Restiv devoted to the birds in his posthumous letters. Mais le communisme les retenait dans l'égalité. Others beside Restiv disproved the suggestion that there was no communism in the French Revolution, and that the revolutionaries all accepted the sanctity of private property. Jean-Claude Chapius, who lived in the same building as Restiv during the late 1790s, attacked the Declaration of the Rights of Man for its defense of property rights, anticipating Proudhon's by nearly half a century in labeling property as theft. Another proposal in 1795 argued for la communauté des biens-fonds, communauté d'industrie, and urged the formation of small territorial communes. Restiv's 3-volume Philosophie de Monsieur Nicolas of 1796 called for a communauté universelle and talked about the communists as if they were active and numerous in the real world. The question of whether Restiv was alluding to or in some way connected with Babeuf's concurrent conspiracy takes us deeper into the occult labyrinth of Paris, where modern revolutionary organizations began. But it is worth glancing first across the continent to the open spaces of St. Petersburg, where the real communists eventually were to come to power. The first of the many Russians to commence substantively on Restiv was the founder of a distinctively Russian tradition of revolutionary intelligentsia, Alexander Radjishev, writing in his famous Journey from Petersburg to Moscow. In the first year of the French Revolution, Radjishev blasted the libertarian excess and sexual permissiveness of Restiv's communism, providing a hint of a more aesthetic and puritanical version that was to come. The Bonneville connection. The possibility of links between Restif's verbal communism and Babeuf's active conspiracy has never been seriously considered, partly because historians of the revolution have been slow to acknowledge the importance of Restif, but perhaps even more because the paths of investigation led into dark corridors of the human imagination. That Western positivists, no less than Eastern Marxists, prefer to ignore. But before plunging into explore in all seriousness the occult origins of revolutionary organization, it might be well to summarize such evidence as existing for the possibility of actual links between those seminal figures whom we have found to share so many ideological affinities. While no public suggestion of a link between Babeuf and Restif was raised at the former's public trial, the authorities, as they prepared their case, apparently believed that such a link existed. Historians now can hardly hope to find more conclusive evidence than the prosecutors were able to amass at the time before deciding not to press the connection in court. But Babeuf repeatedly used the word communauté in inventions like communautistes in the revolutionary manner of Restif, and Restif tantalizingly ends Monsieur Nicolas, the magnum opus in which he first sets forth his full-blown communist ideal, with a reference to Babeuf followed by 3 dots. He may have been suggesting that the imperatives he provided were flowing into Babeuvist movement that was just beginning. A more serious link almost certainly lies in Maréchal, the journalistic protector and sponsor of Babeuf's early career, who knew Restif well before the revolution and before meeting Babeuf. Maréchal's still obscure role in the conspiracy, like Restif, he escaped prosecution altogether despite his direct involvement, leads back in turns to the links that Babeuf, Restif, and Maréchal all had with Babeuf's social circle. Bonneville was perhaps Restif's closest friend, seeing him almost daily in the mid and late 1790s. Bonneville's most extreme revolutionary associate, Jean-François Varlet, lived in the same building as Restif at the time. He was becoming his collaboration with Babeuf. Bonneville secretly printed Restif's basic communist treatise, Monsieur Nicolas, in his own home along with the follow-up treatise Le Philosophies de Monsieur Nicolas and Varlet's Explosion. Babeuf had close knowledge of, if not direct contact with, the social circle in 1790, placing the Bouche de Fer at the head of his own list of journals, and in December 1790 signing his name Babeuf de la Société de la Confédération Universelle des Amis de la Vérité. He may have had continuing contact with the Confederation in Picardy, where there was special provincial enthusiasm for the Confederation. He could have had personal contact with Bonneville in Paris in December 1790, or again in April 1793, when Maréchal suggested that Babeuf take a job as typographer for the press of the social circle. At that exact time, Maréchal was engaged in an intensive program of publication at Bonneville's press, and both of his major works of 1793, Correctif à la Révolution and Almanach des Républicains, bore the mysterious new designation à Paris chez les directeurs de l'imprimerie du Cercle Social. It would appear that Maréchal himself was one of the directors of this press, and that this press, which continued to publish works by Maréchal and other Babevists, linked in some way Bonneville's circle with Babeuf's conspiracy. Important further evidence for suggesting such a link can be found in the neglected pamphlet of Varlet, which appeared in 1792 as the first document to bear the imprimatur of the directors of the press of the social circle. His project for a special and imperative mandates to those mandated by the people to the National Convention purported to be printed at the expense of sans-culottes, and seemed to call for little less than a social revolution. It was a warning of the dangers of legislative tyranny in any central assembly within the new republican, where careerists may claim to represent the people while failing to satisfy their concrete social and economic needs. In order not to betray what Verlet was the first to call the Second Revolution, he bluntly instructed those mandated by the people, "You will cement the social pact. You will lay the foundation that has so far been neglected of social happiness." Thus Maréchal appears to have derived his concept of a need second social revolution from this his fellow director of Bonneville's press. Maréchal's subsequent participation in the Babeuf conspiracy was kept secret until revealed in Buonarroti's history in 1828, which explained the materials on Maréchal's definitive legislation of equality were hidden in a place inaccessible to the police. Any such materials may have remained hidden from scholars as well, so the precise nature of Babeuf's links with Maréchal and the surviving directors of the social circle cannot be determined. There is strong reason to believe, however, that Babeuf borrowed heavily from the Bonneville he had admired in 1789 through 90 in shaping his own conspiracy in 1795 through 96. Babeuf took both the title and function of his key journals from Bonneville's earlier Tribune of the People. He adapted this new name at precisely the point when his journalism assumed the oracular and mobilizing functions. Bonneville's journal had claimed for itself during the Parisian insurrection of 1789. Posters to be distributed by the Babeuvists alluded to the precedents of 1789 rather than 1792, not only to attract a broader base of support, but also to suggest an uprising beyond politics of the kind first envisioned in Paris by Bonneville. Babeuf revived Bonneville's favorite fantasy of using trumpets in the streets to make announcements, his stress on social goals and bonheur commun, and his assignments of leadership roles to women. Babeuf may also have adopted from Bonneville the more general idea of a network of reporters, supporters, and of a secret inner circle directing a broader public confederation. Bonneville's social circle had a far more extensive program than is generally realized during the 2 years prior to Robespierre's dictatorship in the summer of 1793. The social circle was, moreover, more radical in social policy than were the rival Jacobins, setting up an agitation organization for wage earners and artisans in 1791, the Point Central des Arts et des Métiers, writing pioneering treatises on insurrection and calling for equality above all, equality between men, equality between the departments, between Paris and the rest of France. These militant egalitarian ideals attracted new interest
after the fall of the Jacobin dictatorship and the parallel deepening of the economic crisis in Paris. Although the nature and the extent of Bonneville's activity after Thermidor is still obscure, he became even more closely linked with Restif and Mercier and remained active and influential until 1800, when Napoleon shut the last journal of the social circle, Le Bien Informé, after Bonneville compared Napoleon to Cromwell. Whatever the precise links of Babeuf to Bonneville, of both with Maréchal, and of all the Buonarroti, a common force shaped them all. Romantic occultism. It is to be unfamiliar, but unavoidable, world that one now turns in an effort to map the mysterious and to approximate answers to the question's origins. End of chapter 3.